Wait a minute. Wait, this isn't the right intro. Stop! Let me fix this. Just give me a moment. There we go. That's what we like to see. Alright. Anyway, on with the show. Hello everyone, today we're going to be taking an in-depth look at the 3D converted panels I did of Bittersweet Candy Bowl, and I will be discussing why I chose them and what the 3D adds to the scene. Keep in mind, 3D is not a complete storytelling tool in and of itself, but a storytelling enhancer. Imagine it like the icing on top of a cake. It's not the whole cake, but it enhances the flavor, and it can add a new level of intimacy between the story, characters, and audience. Let's get started. First, I want to explain a few 3D terms so that we're all on the same page. Negative space, or negative parallax, refers to anything coming out of the screen towards the audience. This is the pop-out effect you see in 3D. Subsequently, positive space, or positive parallax, refers to any objects going behind the screen. Z-axis refers to the axis in which the images can come in or out of the screen. Horizontal and vertical are referred to X and Y respectively, and the Z-axis is the third dimension. Volume refers to how round an object is. The images we're about to see are merely flat shapes cut out and pushed along the Z-axis. It will not have any volume to them. Think of 3D volume like a balloon. The more air you put into the balloon, the more volume it has and the fuller it looks. If you want to learn more about volume and how camera distance can affect that, please refer to my 3D interaxial and volume demonstration videos. They will be linked in the description. Depth map refers to a grayscale paint of a 2D image that allows for volume to be added. The screen plane is the area on the Z-axis that is the screen itself. The screen you are watching this on is the screen plane. Think of it as 0 on the Z-axis. During this, I would encourage you to close one eye to compare the original 2D image to what it looks like in 3D. The first image here doesn't really have much to do with the storytelling. It was my first test to see if it would be possible to convert the comic, and it ended up being successful. However, you can see the black borders around the different shapes, and this was due to me not filling in the backgrounds. I wouldn't learn to do this for the next several images, so bear with me. The character, Daisy, is coming out into negative space as she speaks to her friends. The speech bubble is on the screen plane, and the bushes and sky are pushed into the back. Not much here story-wise, but it seemed like a simple panel to do on a first test, and it was very successful. This next image has a bit more going on. Mike and Lucy are hanging off a crumbled path over a raging river which is very far below them. Sadly, due to my inexperience, I didn't give Mike or Lucy any form of depth to show them dangling back into the screen, but I was able to push the cliff face and river far below them while keeping Mike and Lucy at the screen plane. The text bubble is coming out into negative space as Mike is yelling to his friends to help him up. Adding this coming out of the screen adds a level of projection to his voice, heightening the urgency of the situation. The deepness of the 3D with the river below also shows just how high up they are. I think with a bit of work, I could finagle up a depth map for this one to make the 3D look better. This panel shows Lucy talking to her friend Daisy, who's looking for Mike to return his textbook. Lucy's the dominant one in the scene, not wanting to speak to her about Mike. Her no is brought out into negative space to make more of an impact at her annoyance. Lucy herself is in negative space while Daisy is in positive space, as though Lucy is trying to escape the screen to get away from her altogether. This panel, more or less, was chosen as all the hearts provided a fun challenge and allowed for more bits of 3D objects to make for an interesting 3D shot. Sometimes 3D can provide fun and unique views outside of storytelling reasons. Here, all the hearts floating around, mostly the ones coming out at you, show how much Daisy is infatuated with Mike. This is another shot from earlier in the chapter. This one was a particular challenge as there were many objects to cut out and I was still just starting out with these conversions. It took me a while to understand what objects needed to be cut out together. This is similar to the previous image where the shot felt like a good fit for interesting 3D, as there are many layers to the scene. Lucy, who is leaving the house in the foreground, is also leaving through the screen in negative space. The house, along with the speech bubbles and Yashi, her pet, and Jordan, her brother, are all in positive space. Even the inside of the house is pushed back on its own plane behind Jordan. It just looks nice. For a while, this was my favorite conversion. Here was one where I felt like it was a no-brainer for a 3D conversion, though it was really tedious to do due to all the thin lines and motion blur. Yashi, the green creature in the foreground, is trying to fly off the bed as Lucy tries to sleep. Yashi is leaping off the bed and the screen into negative parallax as she attempts to take flight. The fan is given a little bit of negative parallax as it is a distance from the bed. An important thing for converting images to 3D is making sure that all objects are spatially in the right place on the z-axis. These next few images were chosen as they were easy to convert and would provide interesting looking 3D views of the comic. The first one of Mike laughing at Yashi sees Yashi in negative space looking up at him in positive space. Her "what" speech bubble also coming out to punctuate her frustration. Here, Mike and Lucy are playing a video game. The framing of this is as though the reader is behind them looking over their shoulders or in between them on the couch they are sitting on. I kept this idea in mind and put both of them in negative space as they are closer to the reader this way as they would be if the reader was actually in that scene. The TV is in positive space, though closer than what it would seem in real life to keep the focus of the shot relevant. Here Lucy notices snow outside when she wakes up. This scene has several layers, which is why I chose to convert it. This scene is very similar to the last, but I brought Lucy further out into negative parallax to punctuate the look of surprise horror on her face as she learns that, despite the snow, schools are still open. Bringing the characters closer to the audience on the z-axis is useful for many reasons, as we will see, but mostly for the intimacy between the viewer and the character, closing the distance between the two and blending the storytelling into the real world. The shot here sees Mike and Lucy walking away from their friend David on the way to school. This is just another pleasing 3D shot with the dynamic duo walking away into positive space from their friend who is in negative space. The 3D adds a nice sense of placement to the characters. While the other images were purely for the thrill of converting the comic, I really wanted to sit down and start thinking about things from a storytelling perspective, and I started to be more selective about what panels I wanted to convert, because it also takes a while to convert them. The context here being that Abby, the brown cat, has not yet apologized to Paulo, the orange cat, for assaulting him. Paulo is dominating the scene against Abby. He comes out into negative space with a smug expression, with Abby shrinking behind the screen into positive space. Paulo here has the upper hand on him, which due to their spotty history makes Abby uncomfortable. And I expressed this in 3D by having the 3D be so extreme here. The 3D is almost too intense, giving the viewer the same feeling Abby is having at the moment. Even Abby's speech bubble in the third panel appears far behind Paulo. Putting certain characters in the negative space is a good way to show their dominance over the scene, characters, and subsequently the audience. This is just another nice 3D shot. It had many layers which provided a nice view. In this shot, Paulo is still coming out into negative space, though this is more due to him being closer to where the camera would be. Paulo invited Daisy out to see a movie, who interpreted his intentions as him asking her out on a date. However, that is shattered when Paulo's friend David pops into the shot to greet her. This was an interesting one to convert, as while David is the dominant one in the scene, he is also behind the other two. I counterbalanced this by bringing his greeting into negative space, while Daisy and Paulo remain at the screen plane. This way, he can still be making an impact in 3D while still being behind the foreground characters. This chapter saw Daisy and Paulo going to a convention. This is one of my favorites, and it was also very time consuming to convert, but the end result was worth it. Daisy, in her excitement, bursts out of the screen as she looks around, with Paulo behind her on the screen plane, followed by the crowd which takes up different layers, then the trees and banner, the buildings, and finally the sky. It was a lot of work. However, the 3D further puts Daisy's excitement into the foreground and closer to the reader. This panel, dubbed "This Is My Curse" due to its similarities to a shot at the end of Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man film, sees Mike sadly walking down the sidewalk past Lucy. He is walking out into negative space as Lucy stands behind him worried in positive space. This is a very cinematic shot, and one thing Tashi has gotten good at is atmosphere and mood. The rest of the world is pushed back far behind them on the z-axis, giving the two characters the spotlight. This next series of panels was an obvious one. I mean, Lucy is literally reaching outside the box in this first panel. Lucy is reaching out for Mike in negative space, but as she has some inner struggle about whether or not she should help him, she slowly draws back behind the screen, away from him and the reader. Tashi did a good job at showing this in 2D, with Lucy breaking the box, and 3D brings the effect full circle. This is probably my favorite of the conversions. Mike is feeling empty due to his current issues with his long-distance relationship girlfriend Sandy. He feels isolated and alone. Tashi shows this by having him be the only student in his row and column. In 3D, Mike is pulled into deep negative space while everyone else is pushed back into positive space. Not only is he alone in 2D, but in 3D he is no longer even in the same space as everyone else, exiled out of the screen, out of his world, while everyone else remains behind. Here we see Mike sitting with Daisy as she does homework. I chose these because I wanted to show changes in depth without having access to using volume. In the first panel, everything is far out from Mike, with Daisy in negative space and the bookshelf in positive space. Mike is on the screen plane. By the last panel, the 3D has become shallower as Mike feels as though the world is closing in on him. He also remains on the screen plane while Daisy and the bookshelf move, showing that he also feels stuck in place as the world moves around him. Here, Sandy has come to visit Mike. She stands out from the crowd in 2D, of course, as she is fully colored and drawn, but 3D helps pull her out of the screen, closer to the reader and closer to Mike. It's an intense moment. Mike is finally getting to see her again after so long. I also provided a depth map to the ground she is standing on, so it goes from out of the screen back into it. The other characters in the background, along with the bushes and sky, were all layered differently. Mike and Sandy ride in the back of this car together, though Mike can't help but feel anxious about the situation. He almost feels detached from her, which I showed by pulling him into negative space while leaving Sandy behind in positive space, along with the rest of the car in the background. Having his face coming out to the reader also further highlights his expression. This is already a well illustrated panel for this, but the 3D adds a new level of intimacy. Mike is out with the reader, making the reader feel like they're with him. I don't have much to say about this one. It just seemed like a nicely framed shot for 3D. Ironically, the character speaking, David, is supposed to be looking through this circle with one eye, meaning it would really be in 2D. This is the final and most recent image I converted. I tried a new panel type, one with a panel within a panel. With the characters standing together in a group, it provided several layers to separate and made for an interesting 3D shot. Sue, the character with blue hair, comes out into negative space. Funnily enough, her friend trying to hide behind her, Stacy, is also coming out towards the viewer slightly. Amaya, on the far right, comes out, with everyone else falling behind the screen. The 3D provides a nice sense of placement for the characters. Thank you so much for watching till the end of this video. I hope you all learned something about the thought process behind using 3D as a storytelling tool. I do plan on doing more conversions of this comic in the future. The conversions are in no way meant to replace the original version of the comic, merely a supplement to the storytelling. Looking at the difference between the 2D and 3D versions really does help breathe a new life into them.